Dad, don't make it weird. It's just easier this way. That's the sentence my daughter used to explain why I wouldn't be at her wedding. And I didn't even hear it from her first. I heard about the whole thing from my sister-in-law, who called on a Tuesday afternoon, assuming I already knew, chattering away about what she was going to wear to the ceremony that Saturday, asking whether I'd booked a room at the resort yet, or if I was driving up the morning of. I was standing at my kitchen counter in Thunder Bay with a mug of tea going cold in my hand, looking out at the snow that still hadn't quit, even though it was nearly the end of April. And I let her talk, because I didn't have the heart to interrupt and tell her that I had no idea what she was talking about. My own daughter was getting married in 4 days, up in Muskoka, at some lakeside place with a name I couldn't pronounce, and nobody had thought to mention it to the man who raised her. I'm 66 years old. I've had my share of hard mornings. I buried my wife when our girl was 9. I spent 38 winters at the paper mill, most of them as a millwright, crawling into machinery that could have taken my arm off if I sneezed at the wrong time. I've had 2 knees replaced and a shoulder that clicks like a turn signal every time I reach for the top shelf. So I know what it is to absorb a blow and keep standing. But there's a particular kind of quiet that fills a house when you find out the people you built your whole life around have quietly decided you're optional. Let me back up, because I want you to understand this properly, not just the ending. My wife, Eleanor, passed in the spring of 1998. Breast cancer. It moved fast. One November we were arguing about whether to drive down to see her mother for Christmas. And by the following June I was standing at a plot out on the edge of town, wondering how a man who could rebuild a hydraulic press was supposed to raise a 9-year-old girl by himself. I wasn't good at it. Not at first. I burned more grilled cheese than I'd like to admit. I sent her to school one February morning in mismatched boots because I genuinely did not know they were supposed to match. I missed a parent-teacher night because I picked up a double at the mill and forgot to write it on the calendar, and I cried about that in the truck afterward like a damn fool. But I showed up. That was the one thing I got right. I was there for the recitals and the science fairs and the terrible school gym band concerts where you couldn't tell what song they were playing. I packed her lunch every single morning before my shift, and I learned to braid hair off a video the woman at the library printed out for me. Everything I did after Eleanor died ran through one question. What does my girl need? I don't think I asked myself even once what I needed. That felt selfish back then. Maybe it was just easier not to ask. She grew up strong and smart, my daughter. She got into a good school in Toronto, took a degree in communications, landed a job at an advertising firm downtown, moved into an apartment on a street I couldn't afford to sneeze on. And I was proud. God, I was proud. There's a photo of her at her convocation, gown and all. And I keep it on the fridge held up by a magnet, shaped like a moose that she bought me as a joke when she was 12. That photo has been on that fridge for 11 years. Even after she moved out, I kept helping the way you do. A little for a car repair. A little when she had a dental thing her benefits didn't cover. Nothing that raised an eyebrow. That's just what a parent does. Then, about 6 years back, she called me one night in tears. Her rent had jumped. Toronto being Toronto. And she was underwater. Her voice was shaking, and I could hear that little girl panic underneath the grown woman words, and it undid me the way it always did. I told her not to worry, that I'd send her a bit every month until she got her footing. Temporary. That was the word I used, and I meant it. Temporary. You already know how this goes, don't you? Temporary has a way of quietly becoming permanent when nobody's watching the calendar. The e-transfers went out on the 1st of every month like clockwork. Some months, 700. Some months, 9. She always told me things were about to turn a corner. A promotion coming. A raise being discussed. A roommate moving in to split the load. I believed every word, every time, because I wanted to. That's the thing nobody tells you about being a parent. You'll believe almost anything if believing it means your kid is okay. So there I was that Tuesday, phone still warm against my ear, my sister-in-law going on about table settings, and I finally just said, "Remind me of the date again?" Real casual, like a man who simply lost track. "Saturday," she said. This Saturday, at the lake. I got off the phone and I sat down at the kitchen table and I stared at that moose magnet holding up the convocation photo, and I didn't move for a long time. That night, I called her. My daughter. She picked up on the fourth ring, and the second she heard my voice, I could tell. That little hitch, that oh no she couldn't hide. "Hi, Dad. I hear congratulations are in order," I said. Silence. Then a long breath let out slow, the kind you take when you've been dreading a thing and it's finally arrived. "Who told you?" Not who told me the good news, just who told you. Like it was a leak that needed patching. Does it matter? Were you going to invite your own father to your wedding? Or was I supposed to see it on the internet after the fact? And that's when she gave me the line. "Dad, don't make it weird. It's just easier this way." Then, when I didn't answer, she kept going, and every word was worse than the last. She said Marcus's family was hosting, that it was their venue, their guest list, that his parents had a certain kind of gathering in mind. She said it wasn't personal. She said I'd feel out of place. She said, and this is the one that lodged in me like a splinter I still haven't dug out, that it would just be a lot of explaining. A lot of explaining. Me, her father. As if I were a stain on a shirt she'd have to apologize for at the door. I asked her, straight out, whether her husband-to-be's people knew she'd been living 6 years on my money. Whether they knew the man who was too much explaining had been paying the rent on the apartment where she got engaged. And there was a pause on the line, a real one. And in that pause I understood something I hadn't let myself see before. They didn't know. Of course they didn't. The whole polished picture depended on nobody knowing where the polish came from. I didn't yell. I want you to know that. I've never been a yeller. I said, "All right then. I hope it's a beautiful day." And I hung up before my voice could do anything I'd regret. Then I sat in my kitchen, and I felt the floor of my life tilt a couple of degrees. Now here's a part I didn't understand until later, so I'll tell it to you the way it came to me, out of order. That expensive wedding at the lake, the one my presence would have complicated. It wasn't paid for out of some deep well of family money the way I assumed. Some of it was his parents', sure. But a good chunk of it, I'd find out, was financed. Lines of credit. A wedding loan, if you can believe there's such a thing. The apartment I'd been keeping afloat. The honeymoon they'd already booked to Portugal. The ring. The venue. A whole life held up by borrowing and by an old millwright in Thunder Bay who sent an e-transfer every first of the month. A couple who couldn't cover their own rent were throwing a wedding for 110 people. I didn't do that math until much later. At the time, all I knew was that I wasn't wanted, and that the not wanting had a shape to it now. I was fine as a wallet, just not as a father to stand up at the front of a room where the right people could see me. The next morning, my buddy Bernie called. Bernie and I did 20-some years side by side at the mill, and he's the one man I know who'll tell me the truth whether I've asked for it or not. His wife passed 2 years before mine did, so we've been each other's Sunday phone call for a long time now. "You sound like hell," he said. "I feel like it." I told him everything. The wedding, the sister-in-law, the easier this way, all of it. He let me get it all out, didn't interrupt once, which for Bernie is a genuine act of restraint. And when I finally ran dry, he was quiet for a second. And then he said, "Cliff, you've been standing outside your own daughter's door for 6 years, knocking, hoping she'll let you in. But you don't knock at a house you paid for. You've been begging for a seat at a table you built." I didn't say anything. Couldn't. "You're her father," he said, "not a guy applying for the job." I've thought about that more times than I can count. Because he was right, and the truth of it landed hard. For years, I'd been trying to earn a place that should have just been mine. Trying harder, giving more, sending more, believing that if I was useful enough, dependable enough, generous enough, then one day it would balance out, and I'd be family again, and not just an account number. But it never balanced. It was never going to. You can't earn your way back to something that was supposed to be free. That night, instead of sitting in the dark, feeling sorry for myself, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I opened my laptop, and I booked a trip. I'd always meant to see Mexico. Eleanor and I used to talk about it, back before the mill ate all our time, and the cancer ate the rest. Puerto Vallarta. Somewhere warm, somewhere with an ocean, somewhere that didn't have 3 feet of dirty snow shoved up against the mailbox in late April. I found a modest little place a couple of blocks off the water, not a fancy resort, the kind of spot where retirees go because they'd rather spend their money on being somewhere than on marble in the lobby. Booked a flight out of Thunder Bay through Toronto for Friday morning. One day before the wedding, Saturday, while my daughter walked down an aisle at a lake I'd never see, I stood barefoot on a beach with my pant legs rolled up and the Pacific washing warm over my feet. I want to tell you it was easy. It wasn't, not the whole time, but there were stretches of it that felt like something I'd forgotten a person was allowed to feel. Every morning I woke, before dawn, 38 years of shift work don't wash off in a weekend. And I'd walk the shoreline while the sky went from gray to pink to gold. I'd get a coffee from a little stand run by a man about my age who didn't speak much English, and we'd nod at each other like we understood something the young people rushing past us didn't. I ate fish I couldn't name. I read 2 whole paperbacks. For the first time in longer than I could measure, nobody on earth needed anything from me. Nobody wanted a transfer. Nobody needed rescuing. Just the water and the wind and the quiet. One afternoon I got to talking with an older fella on the beach, a retired school teacher from Winnipeg named, well, it doesn't matter what his name was. He'd lost his wife too, and we sat on a couple of plastic chairs watching the pelicans dive bomb the shallows. He asked what brought a man to Mexico all alone in the off-season, and I told him, not all of it, just enough. My daughter got married this week, I said, and I wasn't invited. He didn't gasp. He didn't tell me how awful it was. He just nodded slowly, looking out at the water, and after a while he said, people will tell you exactly how much room they've got for you. The trick is believing them the first time. I've turned that over 100 times since. Because he was right, too. My daughter had been telling me for years how much room she had for me. I just kept refusing to hear it, kept mistaking her taking for her needing me, kept telling myself the money was love flowing one direction, when really it was just love flowing one direction. I gave, she received, and somewhere in there, neither of us noticed we'd stopped having a relationship and started having an arrangement. That thought is the one that actually hurt, sitting on that beach. Not the wedding. Weddings are emotion, and emotion passes. The arrangement was a choice, and choices are the things you have to live with. I flew home on the following Saturday, a week to the day after the wedding I wasn't at. The plane touched down in Thunder Bay in a cold gray drizzle, and the second I switched my phone off airplane mode, the thing about vibrated itself off the tray table. Notifications stacked on top of each other. Missed calls, voicemails, a wall of texts. For half a second my stomach dropped, because when you get a screen like that, your first thought is somebody's died. I scrolled up to the top with my thumb, bracing for the worst. Every last one was from my daughter or from Marcus. 17 missed calls, 5 voicemails, more texts than I could count without scrolling. And when I started reading them, in order, the temperature of them was the thing that got me. The first one from a few days back was almost warm. Hi, Dad. Hope you had a nice trip. Give me a call when you're back. The next one, a day later. Dad, can you call me? Kind of important. Then they started to change. Dad, the rent came out short this month. Did the transfer not go through? Then, Dad, we're getting a notice from the landlord. Please call. Then, and I could feel the pretense falling away word by word. Dad, this is serious. We need this handled today. And then one from him, from Marcus. Cliff, we need to talk. Call me. Cliff, not Dad, not Cliff. Everything okay? Just, Cliff, we need to talk, like I'm foreman calling a guy into the office. I sat in that little plastic airport chair by the baggage carousel, and I almost laughed out loud, because the whole thing was suddenly so clear it was funny. A week earlier, I was too much explaining to stand at their wedding. Now I was the first phone call when the rent came up short. I didn't call anyone back. I picked up my bag. I drove home through the drizzle. I made myself a proper cup of tea, and I sat down at my kitchen table with the notebook I've kept since I retired. Writing things down helps me think, always has. And I did something I'd never once done in 6 years. I went back through my banking, month by month, and I added it up. The 1st of April, the 1st of March, the 1st of February, back and back and back. 6 years of e-transfers, 700 here, 900 there. I sat there with a pen, and I totaled it. And the number that came out the other end stopped me cold. It was more than I'd paid off the last of my own mortgage with. It was a used truck and then some. It was a good chunk of what a man's supposed to have set aside for the years, when his knees finally quit for good. I'd been living careful on my pension, the CPP, the OAS, a modest RRSP I'd scraped together shift by shift, telling myself I couldn't quite afford the new furnace or the trip I kept putting off, all while a small fortune quietly drained north to south, first of the month, every month, for 6 years. And here's the thing I understood, staring at that number in my own handwriting. It had never been temporary. Not to them. A temporary thing ends. This had become a line in their budget, a fixed cost. They weren't grateful when the money came, the way you're grateful for a gift. They expected it, the way you expect the hydro to stay on when you flip the switch. I had turned myself into a utility. The next morning, my daughter called again. This time I answered. Finally, she said. No hello. No how was Mexico. No, I'm sorry, Dad. Just relief that the machine had turned back on. Good morning, I said. Dad, the rent transfer didn't come through. We're 2 weeks late now and the landlord's threatening us. I didn't say anything. Dad, are you there? I'm here, so why didn't you send it? And there it was. Not could you help us out. Not is everything okay, we were worried. Why didn't you send it? As though I'd failed at a chore. As though the money were a duty I'd shirked. I looked around my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd braided her hair off that library printout, where I'd helped her cry through a heartbreak in grade 11, where I'd sat by myself the night we buried her mother and wondered how I'd manage. And it all came into focus at once, sharp and cold and clarifying. I wasn't being asked for help. I was being sent an invoice. Let me ask you something, I said, and I kept my voice even. When exactly did my helping you become my job? What are you talking about? And there was an edge in it now, an irritation, like I was being difficult on purpose. I'm asking a simple question. 6 years ago, you needed a hand for a little while. When did a little while turn into forever? When did it stop being a favor I chose to do and start being a bill you get mad about when it's late? You've always helped. She said it like it settled the matter. Like the fact of the past was a contract for the future. I have, I said. That's true, I've always helped. And you couldn't find a chair for me at your wedding. Silence on the line. Then, quieter, that's not Dad, that's a completely different thing, is it? I could hear him in the background now, Marcus. Low and impatient, saying something I couldn't make out, and her half covering the phone to answer him. And when she came back, her voice had changed, gone brisk and businesslike. Can we deal with the rent first and talk about the other stuff later? And that, right there, told me everything I needed to know. The money was the emergency. Her father was the other stuff. It could wait. I'd spent 66 years trying to be a decent man, a man who shows up, a man who carries what needs carrying so the people he loves don't have to. But there comes a day when you finally understand that carrying someone who's decided never to walk isn't help anymore. It's just letting them get heavier. I told her I'd send a message, and I hung up. Then I sat and I typed it out slow, and I read it twice, and I sent it. One line, I'm not going to dress it up for you, because I didn't dress it up for her. Help was a kindness I chose to give. It was never a subscription you forgot to cancel. The reply came in under a minute. Dad, are you serious right now? Then, 10 seconds later. This is because of the wedding, isn't it? This is you being petty. Then a third one I didn't even finish reading. I turned the phone face down on the table, and for the first time in 6 years, maybe the first time in my whole life, I didn't rush to fix it. I didn't reach for my banking app. I didn't second guess. I made myself another cup of tea, and I watched a couple of chickadees fight over the feeder out back. And somewhere deep in my chest, a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten, it was there, set itself down. I had no idea yet how ugly things were about to get. But for the first time, that wasn't mine to manage. The first stretch after I turned off the tap was strangely calm. Not peaceful, exactly. Just quiet. The frantic texts thinned out over a few days. Once it became clear I wasn't budging. And I'll be honest with you, I kept waiting to feel guilty. I'm a father. Guilt is the water we swim in. But it never came. What came instead was a kind of clarity that only seems to arrive when you've lived long enough to finally recognize the pattern you're standing in. About a week and a half later, my daughter drove up. 15 hours from Toronto, or she'd have flown into the little airport. I never did ask which. All I know is her car pulled into my driveway one afternoon while I was clearing the last of the spring slush off the front step, and she got out looking tired in a way that had nothing to do with the drive. Older. Life ages a person fast when the bills it's been running up quietly all come due at once. I opened the door before she could knock. "Hi, Dad! Come in out of the wet." She stepped inside and stopped, and I watched her take in the place. The moose magnet. The convocation photo. The recliner where I'd read her bedtime stories. The kitchen table where I'd checked her homework. This was the house she grew up in. The house I damn near lost twice when the mill did layoffs. The house that held 10,000 sacrifices she'd never seen because I'd hidden every one of them so she'd feel safe. She sat down at the table. I put the kettle on. Neither of us said much at first. Then she started, not with an apology, but with him. "Marcus is really upset." I almost smiled, because there it was again, the same tell as always. She led with his feelings. Not her own, not mine. His. "I imagine he is. He thinks you're trying to punish us. Do you think that?" She looked at the table. "I don't know. Maybe. Why'd you stop, if it's not that?" So I told her. I asked her if she had any idea how long I'd been paying part of her rent, and she guessed a couple of years. And I told her 6. I watched that land. Then I asked if she knew the number, the total, and she said no, and I told her that either. And I saw her do the math on her own face, the same math I'd done at that same table 2 weeks earlier. And I saw it hit her the way it had hit me. "It was supposed to be temporary," she said, almost to herself. "It was. Things just got complicated." "Things always get complicated," I said. "That's not a reason. That's just what things do." She didn't have an answer for that. And for once, she didn't reach for one. She left that afternoon without a fight, and I could tell she was rattled, but it wasn't the money that had rattled her. It was that for the first time in years, she was actually thinking. Really thinking. You can see it on a person. It's a different quiet than the sulking kind. Her husband, though, Marcus, wasn't interested in thinking. 2 days later, he called me himself. I nearly let it ring out. Curiosity got the better of me. Cliff. There was that name again. "Marcus, we need to talk about this rent situation, because it's becoming a real problem." And the tone of him, it wasn't even hostile, that's the thing. It was worse than hostile. It was entitled. It was a man who genuinely believed he was owed, calling to collect. He talked to me like I was a contractor who'd missed a deadline. "Emily's stressed," he said. "The landlord's on us. This is causing serious problems." And then, when I let the silence sit too long for his liking, he snapped, "Are you even listening?" "I am." Then say something." I looked out my kitchen window at the feeder, at those 2 chickadees still going at it. Simple little creatures. Worried about seeds, not about a father-in-law they'd never once treated as family being asked to bankroll a life he wasn't allowed to be part of. "What would you like me to say?" I asked him. "You could start by helping. Helping. Not sorry. Not you were right. We've taken you for granted. We shouldn't have left you off the list. Just helping. Always the helping. Never once the appreciation." I ended the call a minute or 2 later. Nothing got solved. But something got clear, clearer than it had ever been. He honestly believed I owed them. That the money wasn't a gift I'd given, but a debt I'd defaulted on. And once I understood that he believed it, well, that told me I'd made exactly the right call. A month went by, then another. And in a place like this, news travels. I heard things the way you do. A fella I used to work with ran into Marcus at the Canadian Tire and said he looked rough. Somebody else mentioned his truck was up for sale, the big shiny one he'd been so proud of. A woman from my church saw my daughter's name, and Marcus is on one of those debt help flyers that circulate, though she was kind enough not to say it directly. At first, I let the rumors slide off. Then my daughter called, and this time her voice was different. Not defensive. Just tired. Defeated almost. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything." "Did you know Marcus had debt? Like, a lot of it? I told her the truth. I didn't. And over the next hour, it all came out. The wedding, the one I was too much explaining to attend, a good portion of it was borrowed. The Portugal honeymoon, borrowed. The furniture, the truck, the whole gleaming picture of a young couple who had it together, held up by lines of credit and by an old man's e-transfers. The rent money I'd been sending hadn't been keeping them afloat. It had been keeping up appearances. It had been the last quiet leg under a table that was always going to fall over eventually. And when it fell hard. His parents, it turned out, weren't the endless well everyone assumed. There'd been help, but there'd also been an expectation running the other way. That Marcus would keep up, keep pace, keep the image intact. And you can't keep an image intact on a communications salary and a millwright-slice pension, no matter how many people you leave off a guest list. I felt for her. I did. Not about the money. About the other thing. About waking up one morning married to a man you're realizing you never really knew. That's a hard thing to discover after you've already tied your whole future to it. That night, I sat out on my back step even though it was still cool. And I thought about a lot of things. About getting old. About being a man of my particular generation. The kind who was taught that your worth is what you can provide, that a father is measured in what he carries. When you're young, people notice your strength. When you're old, they notice your limp. Nobody sees the 38 winters in between. The double shifts, the surgeries you scheduled around your kids' exams. The trips you never took, the retirement you kept postponing. Nobody sees the weight unless they've hauled it themselves. I looked down at my hands. Scarred knuckles, 2 fingers that don't fully straighten anymore. A lifetime of building and fixing and providing written right into the skin. And for most of my life, I'd believed those hands were the whole of my value. What they could give, what they could solve, what they could pay for. Mexico had started to teach me otherwise, and now, sitting on that cold step, the lesson finished landing. There's a place where your responsibility ends. Loving someone doesn't mean you're obligated to hold up a life they refuse to hold up themselves. The separation came about 6 months after that phone call. Neither of us celebrated it. A divorce isn't a win. It's just the receipt for a long stretch of mistakes. My daughter moved into a smaller place, a real 1-bedroom she could actually afford, on the far end of a subway line where the rent made sense. She sold things. She made a budget, an actual written budget, and stuck to it. The changes weren't dramatic, but they were real, and real beats dramatic every time. Somewhere in there, she called and asked if we could talk. Not about money, just talk. And I said, come up when you can, and she did. I want to tell you about that visit, because it's the one that matters. I asked her to come to the house rather than meet somewhere neutral, because there was something I wanted her to see. The morning she was due, I got up early, and I went into the hall closet, and I dragged out the boxes, the ones I hadn't opened in years. By the time she pulled in, the kitchen table was covered. Photographs, hundreds of them, and folders full of paper I'd never thrown out, because I'm the kind of man who never throws anything out. She came in and stopped dead. What's all this? Sit down. She sat, and I picked up the first photo. Her at 6, on the dock at the lake, 2 front teeth missing, holding up a perch about the size of my thumb like she'd landed a marlin. You remember this? She laughed, a soft, wet little laugh. The perch. You told me it was the biggest fish anyone caught all summer. It was, that day. I handed her another. Grade 8 graduation. Another. The first beater car we fixed up together in the driveway. Another. The day I drove her down to Toronto for the start of school. The 2 of us squinting into the sun in front of her residence, with the whole trunk emptied out on the sidewalk. And with each one, the smile slid off her face a little more. Not because the memories were sad, but because she was starting to notice something. There was a man in the corner of nearly every photograph. Never front and center, never looking for the camera. Just there, always there. Then I opened the folders, and this is the part I'd thought about for weeks. How to do it without it being a punishment. Because I didn't want to shame her. I just wanted her to see the thing children almost never get to see. I laid out the paper trail of a childhood. A receipt for dance lessons from 2001. a hospital bill from the winter, she had pneumonia, and I slept in a chair by her bed for 4 nights. Tuition statements, textbook receipts, the deposit on that first Toronto apartment. 20-some years of it, quiet and folded and kept. She looked at it all spread out in front of her, and her eyes filled, and finally she whispered, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "You weren't supposed to. That's the whole point of it." Because how could she have known? Kids don't see the second jobs. They don't see the vacations that never got taken, or the furnace that ran 10 years past when it should have been replaced, or the retirement savings that came up short, so a kid could have exactly what she needed and never once feel the lack of it. We hide those things on purpose. We stand in front of the storm so our children think the sky was always clear. And then one day they grow up believing the world is an easier place than it is, and they never understand what it costs to keep them dry. She cried at that table, really cried, the kind that shakes a person, and she said she was sorry. And I let her say it without jumping in, because I could tell she wasn't finished. And she wasn't. She said she'd been thinking about all of it for months. The wedding, the money, the way she'd treated me. And then she looked right at me. First time in what felt like years. And she said, "Dad, I treated you like a bank machine." I didn't argue with her. It was true. And the truth is where the mending starts. She told me things that day she'd never told me. That the marriage had been coming apart almost from the start. That Marcus blamed everyone for everything. His boss, the economy, the landlord, his friends, me, everyone except the man in the mirror. That every problem the two of them had ever faced, his answer had been the same. Somebody else should pay for it. Somebody else should fix it. Somebody else should sacrifice. And she said that one night, not long before she called me for the last of the rent, they'd fought about that very thing for 3 hours straight. Not about money, about accountability. And something in her had finally cracked open. She'd seen the pattern. The exact same pattern I'd only recognized standing on a beach in Mexico. The belief that other people exist to solve your problems for you. When he found out she'd been driving up to see me, talking honestly, thinking for herself, he hadn't liked it one bit. That was one of the last real fights, and that was the beginning of the end. A few weeks after that visit, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. Handwritten, no return address, but I'd have known that handwriting anywhere. Inside was a letter, 4 pages, front and back. I still have it, folded in the drawer of my desk, and I've read it more times than I'll admit to. She apologized, not just for the wedding, but for the years of taking without ever once seeing the man behind the giving. And there was one line in it that took the wind clean out of me. She wrote, "You spent my whole childhood making sure I never felt alone for a single day, and somehow I still managed to make you feel alone." I sat at my kitchen table and I cried over that letter, and it wasn't sadness. It was relief. Because after all those years of being useful, of being a wallet, of being the man they called when the rent was short, for the first time, I felt seen. Not needed. Seen. There's a world of difference between the two, and most people don't learn it until they're my age, if they learn it at all. Forgiveness didn't happen all at once. Real life isn't a movie of the week. Wounds that take 6 years to open don't close over a single letter. But it started, and it started for the right reason. Not because she begged, and not because I caved and turned the money back on, but because the truth had finally been allowed into the room. And the truth has a way of setting people loose. That was a couple of years ago now. I'll tell you where things stand, and then I'll let you get on with your day. The year after the wedding I never went to turned out to be one of the strangest and best years of my life. I finally did the things I'd been putting off since Eleanor died. I joined a seniors travel club that runs bus tours through the fall colors and out East Coast. I got the new furnace. I took a train trip through the Rockies that Eleanor and I had always meant to take together, and I raised a coffee to her at the Great Divide, which felt like the right thing to do. I made friends, men and women my own age, who understand the ache in your knees before a storm and the particular loudness of an empty house at night. I started enjoying my mornings again instead of just surviving them. Coffee on the step, the radio, a book. For the first time since I was a young man, My life wasn't organized around bracing for someone else's next emergency. And I didn't feel 1 ounce of guilt about it. I felt free. My daughter and I talk now. Really talk. She comes up when she can, and last summer she stayed a whole week, and we drove out to the lake where she'd caught that perch and just sat on the dock like we used to. One evening, I had her over for burgers on the grill, nothing fancy. And partway through, she set down her plate and shook her head and laughed and said, "You know, I used to think you had everything figured out." I nearly choked. Me? I've been making it up as I go for 68 years. But then she got serious, and she said, "When Mom died, you never let me see how hard it was. Not once. I grew up thinking life was easier than it is. And because of that, I never understood what you were carrying." I told her the truth. That's exactly what I'd wanted. That I'd have hidden it all over again if I had to. This past spring, she invited me to a little family barbecue at a park down her way. Some cousins, a couple of her friends, people who actually cared about one another. And when I got there, I saw it right away, before she even waved me over. There was an empty chair beside hers at the main table. Saved, waiting. Now, a chair is a small thing. Most folks wouldn't think twice about it. But an older man knows what a saved seat means. Respect lives in the small moments. The phone call, the remembered birthday, the place kept at the table. A year and a half earlier, I hadn't been worth a single chair at my own daughter's wedding. And here she was, holding one for me at an ordinary picnic, not because she needed a thing from me, not because the rent was due, but because she wanted me there. Later, she stood up and said a few words. Nothing formal, just a toast with a plastic cup of lemonade. And she looked over at me and she said, "When I was younger, I thought love was something people told you." The table went quiet. It took me way too long to figure out that love is the thing people do, quietly for years, when they think nobody's counting. She had to stop for a second. My dad did that for me my whole life. I just wasn't paying attention. And then she raised her cup and said, "Thanks for not giving up on me, even when I made it hard." I had to look at the lake for a bit after that. Turns out gratitude is harder to take than criticism ever was, especially when you've waited most of your life to hear it. I spent a long time thinking this was a story about getting even. It isn't. The wedding, the missed invitation, the rent, the phone calls, that was all just the surface of it. The real story underneath was about knowing where a father ends and a doormat begins. About the plain fact that love and obligation aren't the same thing, no matter how long you've confused them. For most of my life, I thought being a good dad meant saying yes to everything. Every ask, every rescue, every transfer on the first of the month. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do is take your hand away and let a person feel the actual weight of their own life. My daughter learned that lesson. I didn't teach it to her, not with the money or the silence or any of it. Life taught her the way life does, patiently and without asking permission. I don't wish Marcus ill wherever he's landed. His choices built his road the same way mine built mine. That's usually how the accounts get settled in the end. Not with revenge, not with some grand comeuppance, just with consequences, quiet and unhurried and impossible to outrun. If there's one thing I'd hand you out of all of it, it's this. Don't ever let your worth be measured by how useful you are to the people you love. What you're worth was never about what you can provide. And if someone in your life only seems to notice you when they need something lifted or paid or fixed, the problem isn't that you finally step back. The problem is that they never once looked up to see you standing there in the first place. So, if there's a parent or an old friend or anyone at all who's been quietly carrying you for years without asking for a thing in return, go tell them what they mean to you while you've still got the chance. Don't wait until regret is the one doing the teaching. I nearly did, and I'll be grateful for the rest of my days that I got the chance to sit on a dock with my girl again before the water got too cold.